Welcome to State of Politics. I'm David Zhang. If you're watching on Ganjin World, make sure to follow our channel there. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe. Comment below what you think about our topic today. Let's talk about the newest news from the U.S. military. It's a warning from the U.S. Air Force General Mobility Command, General Mike Minihan, who says that by 2025, China will the invasion of Taiwan will come by 2025. And this is an internal memo. Now, in the internal memo, he says that, quote, "I hope I am wrong. My gut tells me we will fight in 2025. Xi secured his third term and set his war council in October 2022. Taiwan's presidential elections are in 2024 and will offer Xi a reason." That reason being, if they elect somebody that's a hardline anti-CCP person, they will have to do nothing but they'll have to resort to using force because apparently they can't peacefully unify. And then he also says the United States presidential election are set in 2024 and will offer Xi a distracted America. The distraction comes when you have the transfer of power. The two parties during election season, obviously they're very against each other, right? And then after the election, whoever wins, transfer that power. There's a certain period of instability because of you have to name your secretaries, cabinet members, get things in place. So that time frame. And then it says, Xi's team, reason, and opportunity are all aligned for 2025. We spent 2022 setting the foundation for victory. We'll spend 2023 in crisp operational motion building and foundation. If you want to know what the operational motion I demand looks like, look at what Total Force Team Charleston did in January. Then he says in the second one says, commander's intent, go faster, drive readiness, integration, and agility for ourselves, and join force to deter and, if required, defeat China. Of course, this is been recently talked about as a huge topic because there's a lot of wargaming strategies to decide on what does a Taiwan invasion look like. And the time frame is very important, right? Most of them talk about 2027. This is when last year, according to the Admiral for the U.S. Pacific Command, Phil Davidson, he said that by 2027, it's most likely we'll see the China invasion. And then this timeline now gets pushed back to 2025. How plausible is it, right? Of course, if the Air Force General for Mobility, which is let me open up his profile here. He is General Mike Minihan, and then Air Force Mobility Command deals with transportation and refueling. So as you can see, if we open up the map of Taiwan on Google Map, we can see that it's super important because refueling is going to be one of the most important aspects. I'll keep not clicking on map. Let's go to map. Taiwan is surrounded by water, and there's not really a lot of ways for both the Chinese side and for the United States to resupply in a closed area, simply because of it's surrounded by the ocean. And so resupply through the Air Force becomes a huge factor, of course, with the Navy involved as well. But if you want to have a sustained supply of weaponry and ammunition and fuel, then that's an important part. And so the Air Force Command for Mobility is readying up for that. Now, does that extrapolate into the entire U.S. Air Force and perhaps the U.S. military? We're not so sure yet because right now one of the biggest problems is actually supplying a two-front war. What's a two-front war? Well, one's being fought in Ukraine, the Russian invasion. If China decides to do something by 2025, and if Ukraine is not done yet, the United States government is already supplying so much money, military equipment for Ukraine, that many people are talking about that how there's not enough resource for Taiwan. And you got to remember the priority for Taiwan is the fact that Taiwan actually has key core U.S. interest involved, whether that's semiconductor, whether that's the trade route through the South China Sea. If you take a look at the map here, right? This is the South China Sea, which goes through Hainan here, Vietnam, Philippines, and down all the way through to Singapore, and then out to, you can go through here to the east to Indonesia and then Australia, or you can go through the west side here to go to Europe and the Middle East. But it's a very important trade route. It accounts for, I think, like 70–80% or something like that of the U.S. trade by sea. And then you also have the strategic aspect of this, which is, if you take a look here, from South Korea to Japan, down to Taiwan, and then down to the Philippines. There's a line there that we will call that the first island chain. The first island chain is the natural barrier of countries that can prevent China's naval forces from accessing the Pacific Ocean and essentially threaten the U.S. Continental United States. So it's very important for us to have Taiwan be free. Then also the other aspect is, you look at here, right? Taiwan's channel this year between Taiwan and the Philippines is called the Bashi Channel. This Bashi Channel has enough water, if we take a look, deep blue water to actually submerge their Chinese submarines, and these nuclear subs can actually, again, threaten continental United States. So if you lose Taiwan, you essentially lose control of Asia strategically. And then, of course, there's the democratic aspect as well. Taiwan is a democracy. You lose Taiwan, the U.S. loses a lot of credibility among allies. And then Japan is also another one to consider because they actually have the most to lose, even more than the United States when it comes to Taiwan, just because they're so close to China. If Taiwan falls, they're next. And they know that in order to avoid becoming a vassal for the Chinese Communist Party, they have to keep Taiwan free. So they always say that, Taiwan's defense is Japan's defense. And in recent days, they've made a lot of moves on this. I think in anticipation for 2025, because the earlier you can be fully prepared, the more readiness you have, the better it is when the date does come, right? So in recent days, what we saw was that Japan and the US actually are extending their security treaty into space to protect satellites. One of the biggest factors in determining how the invasion in Taiwan will play out militarily is if there will be a massive cyber attack in space against Japanese, US, or other nations' satellite systems to essentially jam them, to bring them down so that we lose signals and contact and our way to get to Taiwan, or essentially even in the United States, right? So cyber is very important. Into space for the satellite aspect is also, well. But Japan's also made move with the UK. They've decided to form stationing troops in each other's countries so that UK can put troops into Japan to directly involve themselves in this regional conflict. But the question still remains, right? Will the US government say that, well, we're going to send troops there, but will the people agree? The question is, in a Taiwanese conflict, you have to consider that American personnel will be involved. In Ukraine, not so much, right? But because the values and the interest for the United States is so large, that you have to have personnel involved. So, of course, the war, right? It's going to be a lot of sacrifice. And the war, as according to some of the war gaming, it's going to be very brutal too. But according to so this report here, the NBC first reported that what the Air Force general was saying, they found basically that China is looking for the timeline that when they do go there, they want to make it so that they can do so without the US responding fast enough. And to do that, you have to find a time that the US is most distracted. For them, they think that the 2025 timeframe, which is after the two presidential elections, one in Taiwan, one in US, are done, there's a period of chaos, and they can utilize that. Which they say here. Minihan said in the memo that because both Taiwan and the U.S. will have presidential elections, the U.S. will be, quote, distracted. And then it says that in order to prepare, he's laying out building a fortified, ready, integrated, and agile joint force maneuver team ready to fight and win inside the first island chain. So the goal here is to keep Taiwan free, right? We're not going to spend much time talking about how to keep Taiwan free, but more like why this date is coming up. So the 2027 date was always talked about because it coincides with this, actually, let me show you. So there's an analysis from Nikkei Asia. And they're saying that the analysis is she is putting top brain in charge of Taiwan unification strategy. And the man to do so is named Wang Huning, who says is tasked to create an alternative to one country, two systems. One country, two systems is this concept that Deng Xiaoping started, which talks about how we're going to govern the mainland one way and Hong Kong the other way. Supposedly that same formula would work for Taiwan too, but what we saw in 2019 was not the case. In 2019, they full-on took away the rights of the people in Hong Kong to remain autonomous through the national security law, and they basically took away the one country and two systems, the promise So now the Taiwanese people saw that clearly, and they understand that the CCP will not peacefully resort to trying to unify the country, provide some change. They will do so in a violent way. If people were to keep their democracy, that is, right? So obviously one country and two systems doesn't work against Taiwan anymore. And now they want to task him to make a strategy that works. A peaceful unification doctrine of Xi Jinping's time. He says in doing so, the reason is he was kept on the Politburo Standing Committee was because there were 3 members that were 67 years old, technically not the retirement age of 68, but all 3 of them could have stayed, only one did actually stay. And that person was Wang Huning. Who is Wang Huning? Well, let me show you a picture. So this is the Politburo Standing Committee, which is an executive decision-making body. Within it are 7 members, including Xi Jinping himself, who also is the general secretary. There are 6 other members. Each of them correspond to a particular part of the Communist Party. Wang Huning was always the so-called propaganda czar, or the person behind the brain of the Communist Party, right? He wrote all of Xi Jinping's speeches. And this is the guy that you go to find the proper united front work, the things to do without resorting to violence, right? So he's tasked with the peaceful reunification part. But remember, the memo that the general talked about here, let's go back to that. It should be this one here. The memo that he talked about, he says that 2024 will offer Xi a reason. What exactly is that reason? The reason I briefly mentioned was that if they have a president in Taiwan who is more hardline on keeping Taiwan's sovereignty than even Tsai Ing-wen, which in my view is likely going to happen because of the current state, China's not going to resort to a peaceful unification anymore. They're going to go straight for the military one. And they actually have hinted that they are doing so. Okay, so in a, let me find this article first. So basically, they had a report, South China Morning posted, this person. So it's an expert of the Qing dynasty. And his name is Gao Xiang. He says, well, he was named the head of China's leading policy think tank. Why was he named the head of the leading policy think tank? Because he believed in isolationist Qing dynasty values. What that means is during the Qing dynasty and parts of China's history, China was always closed off. They didn't have external contact. And in doing so, they were able to run the country by itself without any external help. In anticipation for a military invasion on Taiwan, Xi Jinping knows that the Chinese Communist Party will likely be full-on sanctioned by the international community, and to fend off the economic catastrophe that comes with a sanctioned regime is you have to be able to operate and sustain yourself internally without external support, right? Because your trade will be cut off, your monetary systems will likely be cut off, and the world would be isolated with you, right? This decoupling will come. Most countries won't join the war. Besides, say, the US, Japan, and maybe Australia and Taiwan itself, nobody else will probably join the war. They will provide sanctioned, I guess you would call it cooperated sanctions on that country, right? So in this case, the Chinese Communist Party. The reason why they hire this guy Gao Xiang to do the work is try to come up with the strategy on how to better defend against that sanction aspect. So you can see the military invasion is on their mind. If it's 2025, 2026, or 2027, really doesn't matter, because the earlier the US is more prepared for it, the more chances of the US will win in that fight. China will also have to do the same, because if they want to do so, they have to find the gap holes in which the US is the most distracted. Now, there's another part of this, right? In the article that where I showed you, they analyzed that how Xi is trying to put on the unification strategy. It actually tells us one thing about when they want to do it. It says here, let me find it for you first. I think it's this paragraph. Let me just search for a fourth. Oh yeah, so here. So it says, the source noted that this top leadership change hints at Xi's political strategy as he aims for a 4th term. Wang Huning's mission is to lay the groundwork for Taiwan unification, meaning that they want to get this this so-called doctrine done by his 4th term, which is 5 years. So this year, to October, he got his 3rd term. 5 years, that would be 2027, meaning he wants to have basically a base ready for the Taiwanese government to approach them and tell them, hey, this is our unification plan. Do you agree with it? I think the Taiwanese president won't agree with it. Then they'll say that this was the last chance we gave you. Now we're going to do our military invasion. In other words, this also means that within the next decade, so by 2027, it's going to happen, the military invasion. One of the factors that I didn't talk about yet, which is Xi Jinping's age. He's 68 right now. By 10 years later, he's going to be 78. He's closing to 80. By then, his cognitive abilities are going to have to be they're going to deteriorate, and then he won't have the control that he wants for the unification. So he wants to get it done really fast, as soon as possible. And it is the top agenda on the Chinese Communist Party's current goal agenda, like book, the #1 issue, right? So going back to this, the U.S. has a lot of problems. One of them is the fact that they're supplying Ukraine. And Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro actually said recently that U.S. can't maintain support for Ukraine if weapons makers don't ramp up production. What he actually hints at is the fact that there's not enough supply to supply a two-front war. A two-front war is the idea that you have either that's fighting in Ukraine and fighting in Taiwan at the same time. U.S. doesn't have enough resources for that. So think about this. What they're sending to Ukraine right now is essentially emptying the reserve resource for Taiwan. And if the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, which plays the most major role in the Taiwan conflict, cannot get enough supply to outlast the Chinese Communist Party, then there's a real danger that the war could go south, right? And these are the important things to note, because at the end of the day, according to them, like the Air Force, no matter how much preparation they have, like this one here, he's directing all Air Force Mobility Command personnel to fire a clip into a 7-meter target with the full understanding that unrepentant lethality matters most. Aim for the head. So he's, of course, giving them all the preparation they need, right? But the reality is the fact that you can't send resources to Ukraine and then worry about what's going to happen in Taiwan at the same time. There's just not enough support for that. And so we'll see. But exactly the situation is right now, the timeline has been pushed forward by the most senior military personnel ever yet. And all of this is indicating to us that the Taiwan crisis is coming, and there needs to be a lot of preparation for it. So let me know in the comments what you think about what General Mike Minihan has been saying about this 2025 Taiwan invasion. And make sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and also follow us on Ganjin World at the same time. Thanks for watching today's State of Politics. I'm David Zhang. We'll see you next time.